You've bought a carton of eggs 1,000 times without thinking twice. 18 quarters, maybe $2 more if the label says cage-free. But here's what almost nobody knows. The farm that laid those eggs is running one of the tightest, most brutally engineered margin businesses in all of agriculture. And the hen doing the work is worth more to that farm dead on paper than most cars. Here's the contradiction. Eggs are one of the cheapest proteins on the planet, sold for pennies over. Cost in a market where the farmer has almost zero pricing power and can't negotiate with the grocery chain that buys from them. And yet, egg farming has produced some of the most quietly profitable, recession-resistant operations in American agribusiness, companies that have compounded wealth for decades while selling a product nobody will pay a premium for. A business that can't set its own prices somehow keeps winning. That doesn't add up. Yet it does. Every single day. By the end of this video, you'll understand how an egg farm actually turns a hen into a cash-generating machine long before the first egg drops. You'll understand why the real profit isn't in the egg at all, but in the biology and the feed math hiding underneath it. You'll see how a handful of companies quietly control almost the entire American egg supply. And you'll understand exactly why a business with margins this thin can still make some operators extraordinarily rich and wipe out others in a single bad season. At the smallest end, you've got the backyard to farmer's market operation, 500 to 2,000 laying hens, usually free-range or pasture-raised, selling direct to consumers or local restaurants for $5 to $7 a dozen. Annual revenue here sits around $60,000 to $180,000, and the operator is doing almost everything by hand, collecting, washing, grading, driving the eggs to market themselves. One tier up is the regional commercial layer house, 50,000 to 250,000 hens housed in a single, climate-controlled facility, automated conveyor collection, selling wholesale to regional grocery distributors. Revenue here typically runs $4 million to $18 million a year, and this is where the business starts to look industrial. Feed delivered by the truckload, eggs graded and packed by machine, contracts signed with a distributor instead of a handshake with a shopper. Above that sits the full integrated operation, a company that owns the pullet rearing facilities, the layer houses, the feed, mill, and the processing plant all under one roof. These operations run anywhere from 1 million to 10 million hens across multiple sites, with annual revenue between $150 million and $1.2 billion, depending on flock size and egg prices that year. Then there's the flagship outlier, Cal-Maine Foods, the largest egg producer in the United States, controlling roughly 20% of the domestic shell egg market with a flock of over 44 million layers and pullets combined, and reporting net sales north of $3.3 billion in a recent fiscal year when avian flu tightened national supply. That's the same core hen and feed math you'd find in a 2,000 bird backyard flock, just run at a scale that supplies a meaningful slice of an entire country's breakfast. But the carton price on the shelf is just the start. First hidden cost. The hen herself isn't free labor. She's a depreciating asset with a 72 to 80 week productive lifespan, after which her egg output collapses and she has to be replaced, meaning every flock is on a forced, unavoidable capital replacement clock, whether the farm wants it or not. Second, feed. Feed is 60% to 70% of total production cost on a commercial layer operation, and it's priced in corn and soybean meal, commodities the farmer has zero control over. A bad corn harvest in Iowa can wipe out a Georgia egg farm's entire annual margin without a single hen getting sick. Third, and this is the one nobody outside the industry talks about, cage-free conversion. Major retailers and a wave of state laws have forced a transition from conventional cages to cage-free housing, and retrofitting a single layer house for cage-free compliance runs $30 to $40 per bird in capital cost, meaning a 200,000 bird facility can face a $6 million to $8 million retrofit bill just to keep selling into the same grocery chains it always has. Running one of these isn't hard because eggs are hard to sell. It's hard because the biology, The commodities and the regulations are all ticking on. Different clocks at once. Here's the whole egg farm business model in one sentence. You're not selling eggs, you're selling converted feed. And the conversion ratio is the entire game. Let's start small. Imagine one hen. She eats roughly 0.25 pounds of feed a day and, at peak production, lays about 0.95 eggs a day. Feed costs roughly 0.14 per pound right now, so she's costing you about 0.035 a day to feed. Over a year, she'll lay around 300 eggs, at a wholesale price of $1.20 a dozen, 10 cents. An egg. That's $30 of egg revenue against roughly $12.78 of feed cost. That's your toy example. About $17 of gross margin per hen per year before you've paid a single dollar of labor, housing, or utilities. Now scale that. A 200,000 hen commercial house isn't just multiplying that $17 by $200,000. It's compressing labor and overhead per bird as the flock grows, which is exactly why scale is the entire strategy in this industry. Feed cost per dozen at commercial scale typically runs 0.65, depending on corn prices. Wholesale price per dozen for conventional eggs runs 1.05 to $1.90, depending on the season and whether there's been a supply shock. That spread, often 40 to 70 cents a dozen, is the entire business. And here's where it gets interesting. Eggs are one of the few grocery products where a single external event can double or triple that spread overnight. When highly pathogenic avian influenza swept through U.S. layer flocks and forced the culling of over 40 million birds in a single stretch, wholesale egg prices spiked past $5 a dozen in some regions, meaning farms that kept healthy flocks running weren't just making their normal 40 to 70 cent spread, they were briefly making $3 a dozen on the exact same feed cost. That's the mechanism. A low-margin commodity business that occasionally, violently, becomes a high-margin one, and the operators who survive the lean years are the ones positioned to capture the fat ones. Walk into a modern layer. House, and the first thing that hits you isn't the smell. It's the silence of automation. Hens are housed in tiered enclosures with conveyor belts running beneath them, collecting eggs continuously and moving them to a central grading room without a single human hand touching a shell until final packing. A single facility manager can now oversee 100,000 plus birds with a staff of 6 to 10 people, because the feeding, watering, lighting, and even manure removal are run on timers and sensors. Lighting itself is engineered, not incidental. Layer houses run 16-hour artificial days year-round, because hens lay based on light exposure, and 16 hours is the sweet spot that maximizes egg output without burning the flock out early. Ventilation systems hold houses at a precise 68 to 75 degree range, because a hen under heat stress lays fewer, smaller eggs. Every degree above that range is measurable lost revenue. On the grading side, eggs pass through candling machines that scan for cracks and blood spots at a rate of over 200 eggs per second, sorting simultaneously by weight into the size categories: medium, large, extra large, jumbo, that determine which price bracket each egg lands in on the shelf. And on the retention side, most large operations lock in 12 to 24-month supply contracts with grocery chains at fixed or lightly indexed pricing, which is the insider secret behind why egg prices on the shelf often lag the wild swings you hear about in the news by several weeks. The farm and the retailer are both hiding behind a contract that smooths the chaos out. Cal-Maine Foods is the case study every operator in this industry studies. It started in 1957 as a small family feed and egg operation in Jackson, Mississippi, built by Fred Adams Jr., and for decades, it grew not by chasing headlines, but by quietly acquiring smaller regional egg producers one at a time, consolidating flocks, feed mills, and distribution routes across the Southeast. By the time it went public in 1996, it was already the largest shell egg producer in the country. Today, it operates across more than a dozen states, controls roughly a fifth of the entire U.S. shell egg market, and during the avian flu-driven price spikes of recent years, it posted a fiscal year with net sales over $3.3 billion and net income exceeding $700 million. A company built on a product that sells for about $2 a dozen, scaled patiently over nearly 7 decades until the math turned into a fortune. First failure pattern. Over-leveraged expansion timed against the feed cycle. A mid-sized operator who expands from 100,000 to 300,000 birds right as corn prices spike can find their feed cost per dozen jumping from 0.58 to 0.95 in a single season, while their sales contracts are still locked at the old wholesale price. One regional Midwest operation expanded its flock by 150,000 hens in 2021, financing the build-out with $4.2 million in debt, only to see feed costs erase nearly all projected margin within 18 months, forcing a distressed sale of the facility at roughly 55% of its original construction cost. Second failure pattern. Underestimating biosecurity risk. A single breach in avian flu containment, a wild bird dropping, a contaminated boot, a delivery truck moving between infected and clean sites can force the culling of an entire flock within 48 hours under USDA containment protocols. One 500,000 bird operation in the Midwest lost its entire flock to an HPAI outbreak in under 3 weeks, wiping out an estimated $9 million in flock value and forcing a 14-month restocking and depopulation cleanup period, during which the facility generated zero revenue while carrying full mortgage and insurance costs. The most dramatic version of this risk played out across the entire U.S. industry starting in 2022, when a wave of highly pathogenic avian influenza tore through commercial flocks nationwide. In just over a year, more than 40 million egg-laying hens were culled to contain the spread. Some single facilities losing their entire multi-million bird flock in a matter of days once infection was confirmed, under mandatory depopulation orders designed to stop the virus before it reached neighboring farms. Egg prices at the consumer level briefly spiked past $5 a dozen in parts of the country. Grocery chains implemented purchase limits, and several mid-sized producers who lacked the balance sheet to survive a total flock loss and a multi-month restocking window never reopened at all. It was the starkest possible illustration that a business built on live animals isn't just exposed to commodity risk and consumer demand. It's exposed to a biological event that can erase the entire asset base of a farm in a single week. So here's the resolution to the paradox. Egg farming looks like a business with no pricing power and no room to make real money, because on any single dozen, that's true. The margin is thin, and the farmer can't dictate the price. But the math was never about a single dozen. It's about converting feed into eggs at volume, consistently, for years, while surviving the biological and commodity shocks that periodically wipe out competitors. And then being one of the operators still standing when a supply shock briefly triples the spread. The business isn't thin margin. It's thin margin most of the time, on purpose, so that scale and survival do the actual work. Let's run the real numbers at 2 different scales. Scenario 1, the small commercial layer house. Setup cost for a 10,000 bird free-range facility, with basic automation runs around $450,000. Annual revenue at $5.50, a dozen direct-to-retail averages roughly $1.4 million. Operating costs, feed, labor, utilities, mortality replacement run about $1.15 million a year, leaving net profit around $250,000. Payback period on the initial build-out, approximately 1.8 years, assuming stable feed prices and no disease event. Scenario 2. The large integrated operation. Setup cost for a 500,000 bird facility with full automation, feed mill access, and processing capability runs around $28 million. Annual revenue at commercial wholesale pricing averages roughly $65 million in a normal year. Operating costs run about $57 million, leaving net profit around $8 million. Payback period, approximately 3.5 years. Faster in a supply shock year, dramatically slower if biosecurity fails even once. Same hen, same feed, same 16-hour light bulb cycle. Just a different 0 on the end of every number. So next time you pick up a carton of eggs for $2, remember, You're not just buying breakfast. You're buying the output of one of the most quietly engineered margin machines in all of agriculture. Which number surprised you the most? The 17 ahen math or the $3 billion at the top? Let me know in the comments and subscribe if you want the next business pulled apart like this one.